Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast. My name is Nathan Sutherland, and this podcast is dedicated to helping families love God and use tech. Today, we are going to be talking about and answering the question of how do we talk to youth, how do we talk to young people about technology? It kind of occurred to me that we talk a lot about talking to them, but we don't actually talk about necessarily how to talk to them. I don't know. Maybe that's not true. Maybe it's been perfectly clear to you, but this past week I had the opportunity to do a couple talks in person live, and I was just struck by this idea of like, man, I really want our podcast listeners to be able to have this content. So what you're hearing today is basically the youth talk that I give. If I have kind of the ability to do a 45-minute, 50-minute talk to young people, this is the talk that I want them to hear. And rather than just expecting everyone on the planet to hire Nathan to come out and deliver this magical message, I really want parents to hear this. I want you to know what it sounds like, because I believe that if you can understand the concepts of the gospel that are centering our technology on the gospel, then you're going to be able to better apply them prayerfully in your own lives with your own kids. And yeah, I mean, really, I would love to be out of a job in this. Like, I would love to not have to talk about healthy tech and for everyone to do it. And I would go do something else awesome working with kids, right? Like, that'd be amazing. So here it is. This is the Gospel Tech Youth Talk, specifically for junior high and high school kids. There's little variations in it, but the concept here is just how do we talk to our youth about tech? How do we keep it hope focused? And today we're going to answer that, and you're going to hear it. And my hope is it'll be encouraging and practical for you. So with no further ado, let's get this conversation started. Welcome to the Gospel Tech Podcast, a resource for parents who are feeling outpaced and overwhelmed as they raise children in a tech world. As an educator, parent, and tech user, I want to equip parents with the tools, resources, and confidence they need to raise kids who love God and use tech. Thank you to everyone who has made this podcast possible. Thank you to everyone who left a review. I saw them. We got like 10% more reviews last week. So thank you. That's amazing. That means not only are you listening to the podcast, but it's actually impacting what you do. And that is helping other people find out what we do, because we also saw like a 15-20% bump in listeners. So thank you for telling your friends. Thank you for helping people hear about what we are doing. That's amazing. Thank you to our financial supporters for making this work possible. You guys have joined us on mission, and that's incredible. If you want to join us financially, please pray about it. And then you can go gospeltech.net/donate. Gospel Tech is a 501c3 nonprofit with Flint and Iron. This is actually the parent organization that we are a ministry of, that Anna and I founded a few years ago. So your donations are all tax deductible as long as you're in the United States. So I say that for our extra continental friends. So thank you so much for being here with us, though, and supporting us in that. Today we are having this big conversation of how do we talk to young people about technology. And what you're actually getting is, I mean, just the presentation I basically did this past week, where we've been working for years to get a concise conversation for young people that can be encouraging, but is still clear, right? So we don't want it to be condemning where we're just coming down and going, don't use technology, get off my lawn. But we also don't want to be, kind of, tech apologists, where we're like making excuses for where tech is unhealthy because, well, it's progress. Like we really want to keep the gospel at the center. And if it's hurting our ability to be and do what God has called us to be and do, then we want to get rid of that and replace it with something else. So how do we talk to young people about that? And it goes something like this. There's really three stories we're going to be talking about today. The first, we're going to be talking about seeing the big picture, because for young people especially, right, they are dream-centered. They have vision for their life. It may not be tethered to anything in reality, but they have this idea of what the future is going to be like. And actually, I would argue that's a major reason for the increase in anxiety and depression is either their visions are horrible, right? They have these dystopian visions, or they're completely based on their own effort, and they understand that they have to grow. So we need to see this big picture in light of the gospel. We're going to talk about technology specifically, and I believe what young people really need to understand is this concept of behavioral design, what it is, what it isn't. There's a lot of kind of straw man arguments out there, like technology, specifically digital tech, is the first I don't know, first area of engagement and communication where, propaganda has ever been used or something like that, right? Like where mind altering information has ever been introduced, but it is done in a really unique way. And we can see it very clearly if we know what we're looking for. And the third then is, in light of the gospel, in light of what technology is designed to do, practice makes permanent, right? And not in the depressing, like, well, you made a mistake, you can never change. But this idea that both psychology and now neuroscience, which, as I love the explanation that neuroscience just explains what psychology already knows. By the way, if you're a neuroscientist, I didn't make that up. But I do like that idea. Behavioral psychology has been doing it for 70 years. And now we have the science and the neural mapping to show, oh, hey, like these things that we knew were happening, this is actually what's going on. So that's kind of the teaming there between those two. It now backs through research and through common practice. Like this is what's happening. Practice is making permanent. And we'll talk about why that's actually hopeful, not crazy depressing. So those are the three stories we're going to tell. You can either have your kid listen to this, or my encouragement to you would be listen to this, process it with your family, with your spouse, with your church community. And if you really want to dig deeper and you want more support, go use the Gospel Tech Framework. The Gospel Tech Framework is a 2-hour workshop I built. And it is basically these little short videos, and it comes with a workbook, and you can run through that yourself. And it would be 3 hours tops doing the work. But these little videos, and it both helps you develop the words for the conversation, like how do we even talk about the gospel and technology? And it helps you build a framework so that now you have these expectations that are clear with your kids. It's not arbitrary. It's not you deciding whether you like it or not. It's really picturing on, well, is this gospel centered? Is this our highest priority? Does it help us glorify God and be, have, and do all he's encouraged us to be, have, and do? So that's our overview of this conversation. So let us begin. First conversation, we said we're going to go big picture. So starting with a story. As you guys know, we have 3 lovely kiddos, 7, 5, and 2. And a few years back, when it was just Owen and Henry, and they were 4 and 2, we were kind of pre-bedtime doing the pre-bedtime wrestle session. Where I found that tends to be dads who like try to quote unquote wear their kids out, but it never works. They always have more energy than you. So we were doing that where I had a pillow in front of me, and the kids would run down this big long hallway we have, and they would tackle me and just do this in turns, right? And I'd fall over and we'd wrestle a little bit, and I'd set them up and they'd totter back down the hall. But in this particular day, there's double doors in that hallway, and I had only opened one of the doors. That's going to be key in a moment here, because Owen, 4 at the time, was running down the hall, tackling Dad, getting up, and then realized that if he didn't want to wait his turn, he could just knock his 2-year-old brother down and take another turn, right? Because Henry's then tottering his way down the hall, kind of limbs and legs akimbo. And Henry would get knocked down as soon as he kind of picked his pieces back up. Owen would run back again and just shove him down again. And so we would stop and be like, hey, you need to be kind. That's not safe. You need to think of others. Here's what Jesus tells us about, treating others like, but explaining this to a 4-year-old can be tough, right? But this was the conversation that was happening. But it did not stop the behavior until Owen had tackled me. He got up, and you could see the crazy in his eyes. He could hear those little footsteps from his little brother just running down, but he couldn't see him because of that one closed door. He had to run around the closed door to go get his brother, and he took off like a bolt. And I just remember shouting, "Owen, no!" And they met at the doorway, and I watched a tooth skip across the carpet. And I grabbed Owen and I ran him to the bathroom, and there were actually 2 teeth missing, both front teeth. Henry was unscathed. He was just kind of startled at what in the world had happened, but Henry's face had just embedded into Owen's face right below the nose. And it had just rocketed out the front 2 teeth, like full roots. It was 3 years too early. I mean, these babies were gone. And Owen's a tough kid. I was texting people and taking pictures and being like, what can I do? And the response was nothing. Just put some ice on it. And so we were calming Owen down. He took maybe only 60 seconds. And at the end of that, he goes, Dad? Yeah, buddy. I want my teeth back. And it hurts my heart as a dad, right? Because I can't get him his teeth back. I'm sorry, buddy. Like, those babies are gone. Like, you can hold them, but that's it. And it really helped me realize, like, man, sometimes that's us with technology, right? Like, Owen's goal was not get his teeth knocked out. His goal was go have a great time, right? Run hard down this hallway, take a turn away from his brother, right? That was a goal, was to take more than was his and to do it in an unkind way, but he did not intend the consequence. And I feel like in technology, this is many of us, right? Especially our young people. It feels good. It's not illegal. Like, I'm going to go do this because I'm having a good time. And who knows what the consequences are? They might be sprinting down the hallway of life, just about to get their teeth bashed out, or they might be in a situation where they just got smacked in the mouth, right? Something went really wrong with their smartphone, with their school computer, with their social media, with their friend, right? Like something is off and they are absolutely reeling and they don't know what to do and they just want their teeth back, right? They just want to undo the wrong that happened. And I believe this is our spot as parents to lovingly bring in the gospel and to say, listen, you are loved. And yeah, that does stink. And I'm really sorry. I can't fix it. Like, I can't put the teeth back in your head, buddy. Like, son or daughter, I can't undo this hurt that's occurred because of these decisions, but I can love you here. And we can talk about, in light of the gospel, what does a next step look like, right? What does it look like for you to be restored? What does it look like for these other kids to be restored? That's the conversation. So when we look big picture, we do have to start with the gospel, right? And the gospel is the good news that God saves sinners. So that good news brings with it bad news. Now, I want to make sure we're talking about news here, not just advice, I guess. It's not good advice, as Tim Keller would say. It's not you telling your kid, well, if you're good enough, then God will save you. It's saying, no, while you were yet a sinner, right? So let's start at the beginning here. The good news comes because of bad news. It's as for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. This is Ephesians 2:1, right? You were dead in your transgressions and sins. Not dead like not doing anything wrong, dead like who's ever committed a crime while dead. No, you're dead like you're marked as a treasonous rebel against the holy God of the universe, right? There's a God who deserves glory and you're stealing that glory. There's a God who gave you opportunities and you're claiming credit for those opportunities. It's his and you're saying, no, it's really mine though, because I'm pretty awesome and I'm kind of my own deal here, right? So that's the bad news, is that you're dead in your transgressions, Ephesians 2:1. But God, great two words in the Bible, right? But God, it continues down to Ephesians 2:4. But God being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. And this is really huge when we talk about the gospel and why is it good news? Because the gospel is the only conversation about a relationship with God that starts with God initiating and completing that relationship. God going, listen, I love you while you are sinning, right? And I'm going to pay for your sins. And while you will not be identified anymore as a sinner, you're still going to be a body of flesh, right? We can have that conversation maybe another day. You're not going to be perfect, but you will not be identified as a sinner, as a treasonous rebel, as an enemy of God any longer, because I'm going to come change your heart. I'm going to take your heart of stone. I'm going to give you a heart of flesh. And you're going to start wanting to love me more, right? That's what's cool about the work done through Christ, is that we have a righteousness that's not our own. We have a right standing with God where we get to walk before our heavenly dad and go, oh my goodness, like I want to love you well. I want to glorify you. And when I go off the rails, I want to repent well, right? Because of what Christ has done. So we take that and we go, all right, I understand the gospel then. I'm not saving myself. I'm not working hard. This isn't behavior modification. It's not like, man, make sure your kid never looks at porn. Absolutely. We want our kids to never look at porn. But if they do it, and they get, I guess, say it this way, you could never look at porn and still go to hell. That'd be the concise way to say this. So that's not our end game then, because our end game is glorify God and enjoy him forever. That's the end game. So how do we get there? Well, the gospel is how we get there. The good news that God saves sinners. He's done that work on our behalf. How does that relate to tech? That in this relationship, right, when I say, Lord, you are my Savior, and God, take my time, take my work, take my tech, right, run all of this, and I'm going to do what you say because my life isn't my own, it's yours, then I'm saved for the world, not from it. Right? I'm not taken out of the world and kind of set aside and be like, oh, you're holy, which means you never deal with any of these sick, dark, broken people, right? Like, no, you just were one of those people. And Ephesians just told us that Jesus died for those people too. God sent Jesus for all who will repent, and we're all sinners. If you're not a sinner, if you're not one of those dark, broken people, right? I'm not talking saint, like you've been redeemed as a sinner, but you're just not a sinner. Then Jesus was plan B. The gospel is a fraud, right? And you can do this on your own. You can just nail life well enough that God will be like, bravo, I need you up here, right? But the Bible specifically tells us that's not how it goes. We're saved by grace through faith, right? That's what all of Hebrews tells us. That's what we just read it in Ephesians, and it's in Romans, and it's actually in the Old Testament as well. Psalms covers that thoroughly, that we are righteous because of God's goodness and because he forgives sins. And so we're saved for the world, which means we don't run from our technology, but we now have parameters with which we use technology. There is a right and a wrong way. The big picture here is that in life, we've been bought with a price. Our time is not our own. Right? So we don't get to pick like, well, I'm going to go run this career and I've got all these goals and God, come with me, right? That's not how it works. I get whatever days God gives me, and each one of them I'm giving back to God and going, Lord, this is your day. How should I live it? Right? How should I forgive, and how should I love, and how should I repent, and how should I seek you? Right? That's how we start each day. And our tech is now part of that, right? Our tech isn't our own. We don't have free time. We just got time. You got the exact same 24 hours in a day as everybody else, and it's all borrowed, right? And at some point, that clock's going to cash in, all right? You're going to punch out, and you're done with this life and on to eternity with your Lord, and that's amazing. But between now and then, our tech needs to reflect our greater purpose. So that's our big picture. And in light of that, right? And by the way, we could go other places, right? Where God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works is what Ephesians 2:10 says, right? That we are created for good works. That would be the saved for the world, not from it idea. And so we have this big picture. And in light of that, we can go, man, now I love my child. And when I see something taking them away from that, when I see a degradation in their focus or in their joy or in their safety or any of these things, then I intervene, not because I'm scared of all the bad stuff out there, but because I'm aware of the really good thing that's out there. And I want to point them back to that, the good news of Jesus Christ and what that can mean for their life and their friends and their future and their eternal joy. So that's our big picture. Now, I move from that to this. We're going to start talking a little bit about technology because that's our firm foundation that we're going to build on, right? This is the gospel. This is everything we come back to. This is why we intervene with technology, because there is hope. There is good news. We don't just have to suffer through not that bad, right? Well, it's not that bad. That's not God's standard for us, okay? God's standard for us is he is holy and righteous, and we are to be too, and we can only be holy and righteous in Christ, right? Because he lends us his righteousness. And so two things I like everyone to know when we talk about tech. If you're familiar with this podcast, this should be old hat for you, but I want to say it so we can hear it again. There are two types of tech. You have tool tech and you have drool tech. Okay. Tool tech is, and by the way, those are terms I made up, but the concept here is tool tech helps us build, right? It helps us create. It operates at the pace of real life is an attribute you're going to notice of this because it's impossible to create something faster than your brain works, right? If it's tool tech and it's helping me make something, well, I'm the one driving that creation. And it's user driven. That's the second piece. So if I walk away, it doesn't do whatever it's going to do. If you compare that to drool tech is consumption focused, right? It moves faster often than real life. Even if you go to old school video games or something, they move faster than like a board game, or even if you were running yourself, right? Just the amount of input you can get and stimulation you get. And because you're not driving their use, they move faster than real life because they're really easy to multitask. You can play a game while you're on social media, while you're listening to music, while a show's running, right? And you can even be doing this stuff in multiple windows, right? And so you could have multiple games or multiple social media. And it's really easy to rev up the amount of stimulation, to send your body into fight and flight mode, to get all sorts of hormones and chemicals dumped into your brain and body. This could be like adrenaline and cortisol, these stress hormones for fight and flight, or you can get, why am I drawing a blank on it? Oh, dopamine and other chemicals that drive other behaviors and don't simply let you participate in what you're trying to participate in, right? Like it alters the state in which your mind is working. And so those are kind of indicative of drool tech, I guess is how you would say that. Now, that does not make drool tech bad. It is distinctly different, however, from tool tech, and we'll get back to that, why that matters so much later. But I always get that question at this point in the talk of like, hey, but does that make drool tech bad? Like, no, it's not bad. But we will see from the research and from behavioral experience, we are seeing that drool tech operates very uniquely, and we want to know it's not just because it plugs into a wall. It's not just because it has a screen. It's not the blue light situation. Like there is something distinctly different, and especially at this phase of social media and video games and shows and music, and specifically music streaming resources. That's not just the songs themselves, but actually like how we engage that. That is different than it has been in the past and is very Drool techy compared to Tool techy. And yeah, Drool Tech also is, by the way, reward driven. And so it sets goals for us, and then we accomplish those goals, which is also an important part of the conversation. So, all right. So then if we were having this conversation with a young person, we'd go, all right, let's just look at our lives and try to find some examples of Tool and Drool Tech. Here's 5 I like to use with them. Start off with a real softball. Nail gun. Is it Tool or Drool? Most of you would be able to say, well, it's a tool. It literally is called the Tool. I'm like, great, that's cool, right? It's just a really fancy hammer. You can drive a lot more nails with one, but if you walk away, it doesn't do anything, right? A radio. Now, I was going to use podcast for this, but it's too close to home, guys. I'm talking to you through a podcast. So I will say this. Radio is Drool Tech for most of us. If you use radio or a podcast to change your behavior, to inform your decisions, and then change how you live out your life, then that in fact becomes a tool, right? So it does. And like I'm using a tool in creating a podcast because I'm creating with it, right? That is Tool Tech for me. So the exact same thing can be different type of tech depending on how you use it is kind of where we're trying to go with this. But radio is generally Drool Tech, right? We get into infotainment. It's usually stuff we just talk about around the water cooler or like, right? Like, oh, did you guys hear? And we have these kind of fun facts, but they don't really influence anyone's decisions. Like I watched the documentary Super Size Me and it didn't change my eating of fast food. I'm just like, oh, that's gross. That dude got super, super unhealthy, right? And then I'm like eating my Whopper or Big Mac, I guess. Sorry, Burger King. Didn't mean to throw you out there. But that's the idea. Radio tends to be Drool Tech. Word processor, right, is our third. Is that Tool or Drool? For most of us, right, that's going to be Tool Tech. It's very hard to get unhealthy on your word processor when it comes to consumptive tech. Your word processor isn't designed to do a lot for you, other than maybe spell check, but the features are minimal for consumption there. News feeds, either on your phone or through your social media, right, or through your favorite app. These news feeds are going to be Drool Tech, right? They're literally called a feed, first of all. So it's just taking information that you either really want to hear or really don't want to hear. And their goal is engagement. They want you to comment on it. They want you to share it. They want you to look at it. And the idea is if you really want to hear it, then you're going to be like, oh, that's so right. I need everyone to know that. And if you really disagree with it, you're like, absolutely not. I can't believe anyone would believe this. And this is what we're finding with many social medias is that they thrive off the hyper controversial. And we are seeing this now reflected in our nation, that it is not just exposing polarized sides, but it's actually driving us to polarized sides because you're shown the most polarizing ideas on either side, and it stirs up a lot of mud, right? So that is a feed. That is Drool Tech. It's actually intended to drive revenue and engagement, not information. So if you are using multiple news sources and you're going to them and you're engaging them on the same subject, and you're now comparing and contrasting varying ideas, then that's great. You're using that as Tool Tech. That's awesome. But I'm specifically talking when I swipe left on my phone and get to that feed, and then it gives me 5 headlines. I don't even click on them. I just like read it. I'm like, oh, I had no idea that like whatever the 1-sentence intro is, because that's what most of us do with most of the articles. So that is newsfeed, Drool Tech, finally computers, and computers are the delightfully complex one, right? Well, it depends. I can play my video games and I can do my work. And when I was teaching just 2 years ago, my class had one-to-one devices. Everyone had a laptop given to them by the district. And on their let's see, it was on the desktop. There was a share drive, and they could click on that and go to Sutherland and find the day's assignment. But directly next to that share drive was Minecraft, because we purchased these computers from Microsoft, and Microsoft paid billions of dollars for Minecraft. And so my 8th grade students had to decide, do I click on Sutherland's share drive and read To Build a Fire about a guy freezing to death in the Yukon, or do I play Minecraft, right? Like that's a pretty tough decision to do well as an 8th grader who does not have a fully developed orbital frontal cortex, which is helping them moderate their decisions. They just go, this will be fun. Click on Minecraft, right? So computers can be either. They can be both. And actually, I would argue that's a flaw in our tech design. We do need Tool Tech devices that only run things that help us create and don't provide us with those money-generating distractions. Anywho, not what we're talking about today. Today, let's talk about those 4 types of drool tech then. So when we're talking to our kids, we've kind of picked out whatever tech you have in your home. We've talked it out. The 4 categories of drool tech tend to be social media, streaming services, so whether that's Twitch or YouTube or Hulu or Netflix, music streaming services, and podcasts would fall into that. Again, on the for information side, if you're doing this for research, that would count differently. But if it's just consumptive entertainment, infotainment, then that would be podcast and streaming for music, and then video games. So those are our 4 categories, right? Social media, streaming shows, music, and video games. And now we have drool tech, at which point we can go, all right, well, let's assess our drool tech. Just how much tool versus drool tech are we using in a day? That's a really helpful conversation. And scratch it down on a napkin or wherever you want to do. You can use your phone's notes on that. But the idea is have that conversation so you can see it. Use screen time under settings. Screen time, if you have an iPhone, I believe Samsung has Android Pie, I think is what it's called. But they have a screen time setting where it tells you what apps have you used, how much each day, how many times you've unlocked your phone, that kind of stuff. And the reason we care about knowing your tool versus your drool tech is simply this. Drool tech is designed to be unhealthy, right? So we have that big picture of like, well, you're running down the hallway of life and we want to be listening to what God is telling you. Like, I love you, right? Turn away from this thing because it's going to hurt you, not just because I don't want you to have fun. Like, that's not it. I want you to have the most joy and the most purpose possible. I want you to have as much of me, God says to us, as possible. So don't go do that thing, right? You're going to get your teeth knocked out. So we have that as our hope of it. Man, son, daughter, this is who you are. This is what I want you to know, right? Here's the scripture behind who God is and what we're called to do, have, and be. Then we can talk tool and drool tech. That's our setting in which we're having this conversation. But now we need to understand, all right, that drool tech side is designed different. And to do this, if I were to do this in just kind of a couple minutes here, I would start with talking about B.F. Skinner and operant conditioning. B.F. Skinner was a behavioral psychologist. He's kind of known to be the father of operant conditioning as like a practice, and specifically the Skinner's box is seen as the epitome of an operant conditioning chamber, where he trained a rat to press a lever, basically. He did some other work too with pigeons and other creatures, but the rat has kind of become the lasting image of this work. So there's a rat in a box, and he wants the rat to press a lever when a light goes off. And so he decides, well, I'm going to have the light go off, and I'm going to have it press the lever, and it'll get a little reward. And that's great. But at some point, these rewards, well, they peter out, right? The rat doesn't like the rewards anymore. And so he electrified the floor. Put a grid across the floor, ran some electricity to it, and if the rat did not press the lever within a certain amount of time from when the light went on, the floor became electrified. The rat started bouncing around because it's not enjoying that, and it bumps into the lever, and the light turns off, and the electricity turns off. Well, the rat learned very quickly that when the light goes off or goes on, you slap the lever, right? Whether or not you want the treat. So between the treats and the punishment, we now have this ability to train behavior, right? To condition an operant. It's beautiful. And this is actually working on a theory that worked before that. We call it the Hebbian theory of learning. And the Hebbian theory of learning, if summarized or paraphrased, I should say, very loosely, would just be neurons that fire together, wire together. Or stuff you do is easier to do a second time, right? So when you do something, it actually gets easier to do. Now, this ties in with that modern term. You probably have heard it, but it's called neuroplasticity. And this is an important concept in behavioral psychology as well as just general overall brain research, is that, wow, our brains are actually changing all of the time. So they are changing based on our behaviors. And the book, The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge, is an excellent example of this. So the concept really comes from, in psychology for a very long time, the concept of behavioralism is what was believed, that your brain is effectively a machine, that you're born with certain chemical makeups. It's going to make you good or bad. It's going to make you a good citizen or a bad citizen. It's going to make you smart or dumb based off just how you were born, and you're just living out the decisions your brain has already given you. It gives you this kind of idea that you have some choice in it, but you don't really have choice. You're just wired this way and you can't change it. We actually know that to be false now. We can prove that the brain literally alters, like it can alter parts of the brain. It can rewire actions within the brain. And so I'll give you two examples. One would be taxi drivers in London, England. They take this really huge test. It takes them years to practice for. And they have found that when taxi drivers die and they have an autopsy done on their brain, they find out that that part of the brain responsible for physical location mapping has actually not only grown bigger, but it's actually taken over parts of the brain on either side of it. So it has grown at the expense of other parts of the brain. So it didn't just swell, it actually took territory, right? So we're talking physical adjustments to the task they were demanded to do. That's just really interesting. There's all sorts of other it's not permanent would be one. So if you quit doing that job, the longer you've been out of taxi driving and then die, that actually starts to regress. And another important lesson for us. So our brains actually adapt to the task we're doing. And then another example from the Norman Deutsch book, The Brain That Changes Itself, is a woman who, let me make sure I get this right. She had lost the ability to balance with her inner ear. So your inner ear is what helps you know what direction you're facing. She basically had constant vertigo, crippling vertigo. She couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't work her job. They couldn't fix it because it had to do with a medicine that she had taken, and it had basically completely fried her inner ear. And they're like, this is just what you're going to be forever. And she was absolutely devastated, dealing with depression. As you could imagine, she got this opportunity to participate in a study and basically look at, hey, we want to see if we can help you some other way. So this, the doctor who did this gave her a device that fit in her mouth, and it worked on her tongue. And basically it gave little stipplings, like basically little pinpricks on her tongue that correlated with the movement of her head, basically. So if she tipped her head to the right, the little stipplings went on the right side of her tongue. And if she tipped her head to the left, the stipplings hit the left side of her tongue. And so it basically was giving her, well, this is your equilibrium, but it's coming through your tongue. And they actually were able to rewire her sense of balance, which is nutty because the thing that we know to keep you balanced no longer existed in this woman. So they gave her, I want to say it was like 10 minutes of this, and it got her 10 minutes of being free. And then she just dropped right after 10 minutes. She just, all of a sudden the dizziness returned in a wave, and she absolutely collapsed. And then they realized, well, if we do this for an hour, we can get you X number of hours. And after a couple of weeks, they were able to get her a full day, right? We do this for an hour of the day, and now we can get you a full day. And then they got it to the point where she didn't need it. Like she's able to operate a vehicle again because her brain was able to adapt to this new stimuli in terms of balance, right? The ability to balance was still somehow there, but the organ that was responsible for it was destroyed. So they retrained it, and the brain was able to learn balance again through the tongue, like literally. So that's when we talk, the brain changes itself. This isn't hypothetical. This isn't just positivity talk. We're talking, we have now evidence and research backing that. And the reason neuroplasticity matters, the reason operant conditioning matters, is Drool Tech is designed to leverage this. It's designed for engagement. And the whole point of engagement is we're keeping your attention and we are training you behaviors that are appropriate. Right? So in our games, we see this, and I'll just kind of hit this real quick. But if you want more on this, Ben Lewis Evans a user interface designer for Fortnite, for Epic Games. And a couple years ago, he gave this talk. And if you do watch it, he'll at the very beginning be like, don't worry about dopamine. That's not what we're talking about. And then he goes into this beautiful explanation of like, it's not actually dopamine that's driving these behaviors. It's our behavioral design within the game, right? We know the psychology of players, and we are tickling them all the right ways, and we're punishing them all the right ways, and we are getting them to develop these neural pathways to which they basically depend on our games, and so they keep coming back, right? That's what he explains. And they do it 4 ways, which is just the 4 forms of rewards. If you're familiar with this form of behavioral psychology, a fixed ratio, which is basically putting in turns for something. So like, oh, in one more turn, I'm going to get this. Clash of Clans would be a game that does this. Like, oh, you're going to get it, but it's, it's going to be, 5 more turns till you get that, or you could pay me $1.95 right now and you could get that right now. So that's fixed ratio is one form. Also limiting the number of turns you get. Like, oh, you took your turns for today, but for another $3, you could get the premium version and play more. So that's one way of motivating. Variable ratio would be the idea of like chasing rewards in a game or loot drops. So for Fortnite, that's a little llama that you might find. And if you break open the llama, anything could pop out. All right. If you didn't get your golden gun, then maybe you can go find that next one. And it drives basically a sense of dissatisfaction because you're constantly chasing that next feel good. You have fixed interval where there are specific times that things will happen. Like there's this boss generates every 15 minutes or on the last day of the month, this event happens, right? There's set specifically in real time and space. And then the last one, which isn't very common, is variable interval, which is basically like random things will happen in the world, so you have to play more to go find them, right? So that's in gaming. Those are all there. And the entire concept of them is we want you so engaged that you're going to keep playing this game even once it's not fun. So my favorite example of this is Call of Duty. They have what's called prestige classes. So there's 50, depending on the version you're playing, let's just say 50 levels of character advancement. And so you advance all 50 levels from playing the game or playing online in multiplayer, finishing special tasks, and you get enough points to get to max level. And then you can cash in all of those levels. You'll go all the way back to level 0, but you'll be prestige class 1. And now you get this unlock, whatever the ability is or the weapon is for prestige class 1. You can do it again. And most of the versions have about 8 prestige classes. So you made one game with one set of multiplayer and 50 levels. But you got 400 levels worth of play out of it, and players will keep playing the game just for the next prestige class. They don't enjoy the game, right? They've already mastered their skill ability. They're not even really trying anymore. They're just grinding is what that is called. And they're doing it because a goal was set for them that they believe is important, right? I need the next prestige class, so I have to put in this time. But that's not true, right? And in many cases, it's not healthy. And in many cases, it's not even joy-giving or life-giving. It's actually the opposite. And so we just want to keep that in mind when we talk about behavioral design. That's what we're talking about, right? These little pieces put into the point where we effectively believe we need something we never wanted. So it's in social media. Streaks and Snapchat would probably be the safest example I could give right now. So a streak is simply a goal that's set by Snapchat where you communicate with a friend and they communicate back. You now have a streak of 1. And it goes by days. So if on the next day you each send at least one snap, you have a streak of 2, streak of 3. You get points for this. There's rewards for having multiple or for having the longest, right? Like it builds, there's leaderboards on the whole thing. But people get like very upset because if you don't snap them back, your streak dies just once. Like if 24 hours go by and you did not snap them back, you just destroyed their streak and it's over. So I have kids who will wake up in the middle of the night and roll over and keep a streak alive, which is really important. We'll come back to that, right? But that's the punishment built in. So you get these rewards. We have this goal. Go ahead and do it. We're going to reward you. And Snapchat has absolutely done fantastic off this because, it drives both the desire to belong and the fear of missing out, FOMO. And then they added this delightful little addition called being left on red, like the color, RED. And left on red is this idea that if I send you a snap and you view it, but you didn't snap me back. So now not only is our streak not continuing, but I know you saw it because there's a little red icon next to you, or a little red circle, and it shows me that you read it and you haven't responded. Now I just have to assume that you read it, didn't care, and are intentionally being aloof in our friendship. And you can see the pressure there, right? I had a young lady in class who broke down in tears because I wasn't letting her snap her friend back in class. She checked it in the middle of class. I just have to send this real quick, right? Miss Sutherland, I gotta real quick. Well, the problem with that is, right, she's in tears believing that these friends who don't sound like very good friends, are going to not like her anymore because she checked it in class and left them on red. That's design. That's on purpose. Right? Because actually, the worse you feel, right, if your joy and your friends and your escape is in a digital world, then the worse they can make you feel, the more likely you are to return to it. And we do see that happening, right? That this becomes our place of solace, except it's also the thing causing the negative effects. So we basically have a digital carrot and a digital stick. And as long as we participate in the desired behaviors, whether that's in a game or in social media, that's great. We get a reward. And as if we participate in the undesired ones, we're not the rat pressing the lever, they electrify the floor, right? And that's when we talk about neuroplasticity, that's what we're talking about are the habits we're making leading us to the big picture we want, right? Are these guiding us down our life, down the path of life in an area that is going to be helpful? Or are we getting our teeth knocked out? Have we had them knocked out? And if so, what do we need to do about that? And I would just say this to end this concept in social media. I love to ask young people, hey, just talk about social media. Have you ever participated in your social media while you were eating, while studying, while you should have been sleeping, like you woke up and rolled over and took a snap or anything like that, or you stayed up late or you woke up early to participate in it, or while talking to others, while like hanging out in a group? Almost every young person in social media would say yes to that. And the reason that's important is if you go to just basic psychology, I mean, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you look at those four, like all of those are there, right? We need food. We need this idea of establishing a future. I don't agree necessarily with the concept behind it, but self-actualization is what Maslow would call it. That's the highest. Is you need to know that you have a purpose and that you're headed towards that purpose. So studying, school generally lines up that we got a purpose. We're doing something with our brains here. We're seeing God more fully because of our education. Our sleep is critical. Like we can die from that. In fact, it impacts our eating and our studying, and relating with others, like in-person physical relationships are critical. So if we're keeping up with social media because of a goal that was set for us, and we feel we need it more than we need food, a future, our sleep, and relationships, like that's the power of Drool Tech right there. That's the power of behavioral design, is we've made something so engaging, we're willing to give up our needs to pursue a want, and it's not even something we knew we wanted. Right? Like that is the concept we're trying to drive home with our young people. And by the way, young people are smart enough to see it. If we can explain that to them in an intentional way, in a loving way, that's not condemning of like, this is why you kids have parents, we need to model this. This is where Proverbs 22:6 comes in, right? We need to show them what it looks like to live healthy, and when we're not healthy, to live repentant and to fix it. So the whole reason this matters is that we can be convinced we need things we don't even want. And some stats to back that up is that the average iPhone user checks their phone 80 times a day. Not like the clock on your phone, but we're talking you log in with your thumb, your face, your passcode, 80 times a day. We are averaging 8 hours a day for teens on Drool Tech. So for 13 to 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, we have 8 hours of Drool Tech. That is not Zoom meetings. That is not Teams. That is not any tool tech or schoolwork. That is entertainment tech. And it does stack if you have your phone running social media and you're watching a show or playing a video game. So you can do 4 hours of that, but it's because, again, Drool Tech can stack the amount of stimulation you're getting, and that is impacting your brain. The reason those stats matter is because we have research showing us that just using Drool Tech with its overstimulation and with some of the content on it can actually cause depression. So we're looking at starting at 5 hours, well, actually starting at 2 hours. So anything over 2 hours, it begins. But at 5 hours, we actually get up to 66% more likely for a young person to experience depression or suicidal ideation. And that comes from Twenge et al. In 2017. There is some more recent research in, 2020, 2021. Not to mention what was just came out. So by the time you're listening to this, it's been coming up on maybe 2 weeks since the whistleblower at Facebook came out and said, hey, listen, we know this is hurting young people. And we know that we are benefiting from it, and we haven't chosen to do anything about it. And she's also bringing in other aspects of that. But keep that in mind. This is something that is happening. And we want to make sure not that we demonize those companies that are doing it, but that we hold them accountable, right? We allow Coca-Cola to include a certain amount of caffeine because we've realized that when Coca-Cola, when my grandma was drinking it growing up, had cocaine in it, and that was an unfair competitive advantage for Coca-Cola, right? You put cocaine in there, we can't say no, right? We have these people that are absolutely getting ruined by your product, so you can't do that. Now, caffeine is addictive. We know that. In fact, there's arguments to be made that highly refined sugar is addictive. So we're going to allow you to include those two, but we believe it gives the consumer enough of a choice to walk away. And that's the conversation that needs to happen with tech. Hey, listen, we get it. You want an engaging product. We want to enjoy it. We want that to be fun, right? We want it to be positive. We want it to be life-giving. And yet, right now, we are able to prove that it's too much. Right? There's too much downside for the perk that you're giving, right? For the benefit you're providing, it's too much damage. So how do we moderate this, right? And the last one would just be the World Health Organization in 2018 coming out and saying, hey, we have this idea that mental health is a real thing when we talk about technology, and they talked about specifically gaming disorder as an unhealthy thing, affecting maybe 3% of the population, but just so you have the idea of what that would look like in the US, that means that there's something on the line of 75,000 gamers in the US who suffer from that, right? And that's if 3% is accurate, which with most things, when we first get the idea, it seems to escalate. We go, oh, actually, no, like this diagnosis is spreading. We're recognizing that it actually affects more people. So at least 75,000 gamers in the U.S. would be affected by that. So that's why we care about this conversation of Drool Tech and its negative habits. Is it can drive a really high level of engagement for a lot of hours that can cause depression and suicidal ideation, and that has been recognized internationally to be true with things like video games, to be true recently with things like social media, and that we just don't want to be flippant with, right? We want to be intentional. We want to have that conversation. We want our kids to know. But up till this point, the conversation's been really heavy, right? You can feel that. You're like, wow, this is terrible. You're never, ever going to have any kind of technology because there's no excuse ever to have it. But that's not the goal. Again, our kid could never do this tech and still not love God, right? They could still be incredibly successful by whatever standard we put, but they could miss their purpose. And so we want to make sure we refocus our eyes on that big picture, that great hope. I really love John 15:5 for this, where Jesus says, hey, I'm the vine, you are the branches, right? If you are connected to me, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing, right? You can go make a lot of noise. You can go work really hard. You can gain the whole world, but you're going to lose your soul. And I care about your soul, right? That's what Jesus came for, was our souls and the souls of other sinners who were wallowing in their filth, just like we were before Christ came and saved us. So that's the spot. We start with our kids. I really like to add Romans 8, 1-6, where it talks about there's now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And with our newfound life, we set our mind on the things of the Spirit, not on the things of the flesh, right? Because the things of the flesh will lead us to death, and the things of the Spirit will lead us to life and peace. And we're recognizing, like, oh, in light of neuroplasticity and behavioral psychology and so much of what we're ingesting these days, like that actually is hyper applicable for our lives. Like, yes, setting our minds, like doing a quiet time now isn't just checking a box. Like, no, I'm feeding myself. I'm putting into my brain what I want to make sure is the central focus of each day. Not just priority as in first among many, but priority as in the centrality of the gospel for how and why I live my life. So that's really important. Remember that practice makes permanent. So we want to make the gospel permanent. And I think we'll wrap this up here. There's a lot of different directions I could take this, but where I like to end this is simply this. If you recognize in your life, or when you're talking to your young person, say, hey, how do we know if it's healthy? Well, we do a reset, right? Let's look at what we're making permanent. So we've assessed our tool and Drool Tech. We know how much is there. We go, all right, does my tech get in the way of my relationships and my responsibilities, right? Am I choosing tech over those things? Does it get in the way of my enjoyment, my sleep, my emotions? Like, are my best days and my worst days all tied to tech? And my time, right? And can I be satisfied? Can I be invested in real life with my time and energy? Does tech get in the way of any of those things? If it does, then we talk about, all right, we're going to follow what Jesus tells us to do in Matthew 5. We're going to cut off the hand that causes us to sin. We're going to gouge out the eye that causes us to sin, meaning these things are important to us. We know smartphones are important to us. We know that video games are really important to people that like video games. We know that our podcast can feel integral to us surviving in life and through the boredom of quiet in a car, or when we're doing chores or whatever. Like, these things can be really, really important, both because they're part of our interests and also because the replacement activities can feel really boring. And honestly, that can be really important. If we have in a reset, if you can talk with your kid and realize, man, 1 or 2 or 4 or all 5 of these are being impeded, they're being blocked and stopped and degraded because of our tech use, then we need to remove that thing. Lovingly, prayerfully, intentionally remove it, but we don't simply remove it, we replace it, right? This is where Philippians 4:8 comes in. This is where we go, all right, let's find some activities that are true and honorable and just and pure and lovely, commendable and excellent, right? Worthy of praise. That's great. We want our fruit to look like, right? When I do this thing, I want to go, all right, this helps me have the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22. It's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, right? We want it to not look like Galatians 5:19. I won't read them all, but it's sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, right? Enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of rage, right? That's a good list there for our tech use, I think. So we have this conversation and we go, all right, I'm going to remove the unhealthy. I'm going to replace it with healthy. We've had the conversation before about, well, what does it look like to have analog adventures is what I call them. And this idea of like, man, how do we do stuff that's fun in real life and invite other people on that journey with us? And I'll just share a couple. On the Friday Talk with Young People, I shared these, and I think it's a valuable example. I had a young man who was failing class, right? He was a junior in high school. His parents were very concerned. He was failing class. I met with him. We kind of had this open conversation. He's like, I know what's happening. I just don't really care. And we were able to pinpoint a specific video game. And he goes, you know what? I don't think I can just not play that game because I'm also involved in like watching that game a lot. I think I have to literally cut out this entire game that's been a major part of his life by his junior year, probably about 4 years he'd been playing it. And he did. He cut it out. He got super involved at his church and in sports. And he ended up going on a college scholarship and doing very well in a sport that he picked up and really focused and took lessons on and was supported in that. And that's really cool. So sports for him were this thing, but it's not always for everyone. There was another young man who was failing class just because of YouTube. That might sound weird to you, but he had AirPods in and he literally would watch it just constantly. And it was this parasocial thing where he felt like that's where his friends were, even though none of them knew him, which is the idea behind parasocial relationships is you're heavily invested in someone else, but they may or may not know you exist and you don't have any impact on their life. So social media and streaming services can be very famous for this, whether they're fictional stories or real life streamers. And this was his situation. Well, he ended up dropping basically his smartphone and all of his video watching time and picked up board games. And he was able to find some friends at school that were into that, and they picked up a couple board games and specifically, and then they played those. And that was how they spent their weekends and their evenings, and they hung out with their families, and they were social together, and that was really cool. And I've seen it for, a young man, again, with just kind of news feeds for him and kind of doom scrolling, finding out all the bad news and letting that bad news kind of take up hold in his heart and really crush his hope. And he ended up investing his time into like robotics. And again, I'm not saying these kids did this one thing and then it magically went away, but they're intentionally taking steps of faithfulness, recognizing, man, you know what? That thing absolutely feeds the fire of negativity in my life. Like I can't have that and say, I trust you, Lord, because it actively makes me take control and makes me fearful and makes me anxious and makes me, right? Whatever these negative outcomes were for these people. A young lady, by the way, was failing classes because she was so invested in her shows and specifically her animated shows. And so she ended up picking up theater and finding out that, well, I like participating in these like very theatrical, very engaging and invested productions. And for her, that was something that was really healthful and exciting. So I like that idea of finding ways to create, not consume, and of making analog adventures. And there are other podcasts on that. I don't want to go into it much further today, but it is part of the Family Tech Framework. If you're listening to this and going, man, I understand the general gist, but I really want more than just a podcast. You got two options. I can come talk to you or your community or your church in person, and I can do a live presentation, the parent talk on that. Right now we're talking about social media, smartphones, pornography, and then how do I know if my tech is healthy, and how do we make our homes safe for tech? Okay, so that's the parent talk that we do live. The online workshop is your second option, gospeltech.net. You can go to resources, and it's under there, or you can just go gospeltechworkshop.com. And again, it's a 2-hour course. It comes with a workbook. There's a PDF version of the workbook on there, and that will walk you through all that tool and drool stuff, give you some reflection questions through the workbook to help you talk it out and kind of like, all right, yeah, I get this. It's making sense. And then apply it in a family tech framework. That's the second half of the book. It's great. Kind of the second hour, if you will. Great. How do we apply this to our content, to our time, to our to the public space we're going to use our technology, to the safety online? Like, how do we do this practically? And in there is also analog adventures. There's a whole little section on how do I make it? How do I find my gifts and interests? How do we make these ideas and make space in our budget and our calendar for them? So if Analog Adventures kind of tickle you, oh, also I would like to say, almost forgot, great resource from Greta Eskridge, or also known as Ma and Pa Modern, if you're on Instagram and Facebook. But Greta Eskridge wrote an entire book about having adventures with our children. It is called Adventuring Together. Again, I would have been remiss not to mention that. It's awesome. You can go get it from Amazon or wherever. We're not sponsored by her or anything. I just really believe in her work. She also does a great job, by the way, providing resources for parents about how do we talk about pornography and process that conversation with our kiddos. So that's a little side bonus there. But yeah, that's our conversation. So at this point, we have talked with our young people about, man, let's look at the big picture of who you are in light of the gospel. Let's understand how technology's developed, that there's tool and drool tech, and that drool tech is designed differently based on getting you to build engagement, and that engagement's goal is to set goals for you to make you feel like you need things you never even wanted, right? And then the last piece is, all right, well, in light of that, what can we do? Well, there's great hope. We're going to remember that gospel. We're going to make permanent by cutting off the bad stuff, by replacing it with awesome stuff that God has given us to both enjoy and to do, that Ephesians 2:10, where we are saved for the world, not from it. We're saved for good works He's prepared beforehand for us to do. And we're going to make adventures that involve real life people that we are involved with, that God's put in our lives for us to love and to serve and to live life with and to share the gospel with, both in word and also in deed, and letting Him live through us. So I hope this was encouraging for you. I hope that you hear this and go, yeah, like I can picture now at least how to have this kind of big 10,000 foot conversation about tech. And there was a lot of nerding out that we could have done today, but this has been a crazy long episode anyway by my current standards. So I think this is enough for us today. Again, if you want more resources, you can go to gospeltech.net. If you want this conversation for your young people at their school or church, you can contact me directly, nathan@gospeltech.net, or you can go to gospeltech.net and just click on speaking, and you can type in all your info and we will get that booked. That's what we're doing. We're booked up through December, but starting January 2022, we are excited to be going out and to be providing the small group study. The Gospel Tech Workshop provides that workbook and opportunity for families to do this on their own. It fits any family of any work-life balance mix, because it's 3 total hours of commitment for an entire process. And it's a valuable way to do it. We are very excited to be able to extend that. So that would be next steps for this conversation. And finally, I would just ask, if this was helpful for you, if this is something you found life-giving, would you share it with another family? Would you send it to someone that you think would be encouraged by it, or maybe needs to even know that this is a resource? Maybe they have a 5 or 6-year-old right now. That's the time to jump on this conversation, to start processing in our minds like, yeah, what tech do we want in the house? How are we going to go about loving our kids and not just protecting them from the bad, but pointing them towards the best, right? Pointing them towards the hope that is in the gospel. So thank you for being a part of it. Thank you for joining in this conversation and sharing it. And please join us next week as we continue this conversation about how we can love God and use tech.